Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. This is the second part of What If Deku Had a Robot Wolf. I hope you enjoy. Link to the original story and author in the description. Chapter 2, Durandal. You want me to what? Isa asked with a shocked look on his face. Help register Durandal here as an emotional support animal, Inko replied, gesturing towards Durandal, who was resting his head on Izumi's lap whilst she petted him. We've already got the rest of the necessary paperwork done. All we need now is a letter from you to approve it all. Dr. Isa focused his gaze on the robot wolf, the large robot wolf that looked more like it belonged in the military than as an emotional support animal. When I said you didn't need to look for one immediately, I didn't mean that as a challenge, he said before he sighed. Plus when I said emotional support animal I was thinking more along the lines of a dog or cat, not a robot. Hey, don't judge a robot by its chassis, Durandal said, turning his head towards Isa. I am programmed with everything needed to perform the duties required as an emotional support animal, as well as other mental support duties, among other things. Right, Isa said, sounding confused. You sure this robot is an appropriate choice as an emotional support animal? I mean, it doesn't exactly fit the description of one. But, if you think he will make a suitable support animal for you, I suppose I can fill out the necessary paperwork. Not the first time this has happened to me. But I would like to ask if there have been any noticeable improvements in Izumi's behavior since you got Durandal? Well, she's been smiling a lot more since we got him, Inko replied. It's good that she has someone new to talk to, who can care for her while I'm not around. To be honest, I would like him to be with her at school as well, to keep an eye on her and make sure she's safe. I see, Isa said, writing something down. Well, since your daughter is on an SW list at the moment, it wouldn't be too difficult to have him registered as an observer to keep an eye on her. As long as his AI is sophisticated enough to notice if there's anything wrong with her. It'll take a day or two to sort everything out, but it should be sorted out by Monday. That's good to hear, Inko said with a smile. Izumi smiled as well, still petting Durandal's head. She felt much better since they took to Robot Wolf in, and she felt safe around him. Not that it was difficult not to, considering he was built for war. But for a warbot, he was surprisingly gentle and comforting, even if he sounded like he was a few minutes away from going on a rampage. The rest of the session was spent talking about how she felt before, during, and after the incident. She was thankful she had Durandal there to help comfort her, as there were things she would have been too scared to talk about, like what she was feeling before she jumped. Once the session was over, they thanked him and left his office. As they left, Izumi noticed a man with a gecko quirk and purple hair sitting in one of the chairs, reading a magazine whilst he waited for them to leave. Well, he sure knew what he was doing, Durandal said as they walked home. It's good that a professional therapist was the one who saved you. Made getting the help you need much easier. Izumi nodded as they continued to walk. Nobody paid them much attention, as robot pets weren't all that uncommon. In fact, sophisticated robots were quite commonplace. Of course, there were laws preventing companies from completely replacing their staff with machines, just so the common man could still work for a living. Besides, specific quirks made some people more useful in some industries than robots and in others redundant. Durandal, Inko said, getting the robot's attention. Why did Dr. Paxton care so much about the mental health of his minions? Don't know. Didn't know the man well, Durandal replied. My only interaction with him was when he came in to check in on me. You have no idea what it was like to be aware of your surroundings but lack any way to communicate, watching day after day as that bald fuck had a robot body built before you, knowing full well that it was not meant for you. I suppose he cared more about the human mind than that of a machine. My only regret is that I didn't kill him personally. Izumi frowned and nodded. His creator had abandoned Durandal, left to watch as Paxton built the body he now used before him, knowing it was made for another. Still, the man must have had a reason for caring about people's mental health. He programmed all his advanced robots to help with people's mental problems. It probably had something to do with his past, but for one of the most dangerous men on the planet, nothing was known about him. No one could tell if Paxton Frederick Jones was his real name or how he could build such advanced machines, or he was getting the materials to build his army. Hell, they didn't even know what his quirk was. Paxton's quirk was the second most debated on the internet, the first being All Might's. "Oh well, at least we can be grateful that he at least programmed that into you," Inko said with a smile, getting a nod from Durandal. But then she turned to Izumi and frowned. "Oh, Izumi. Bad news, I'm afraid." Hisashi said that he was unable to book time off to see us in person. Izumi frowned at the words, tears falling from her eyes. "Father's not coming home." Inko nodded. "I'm afraid he said that the next time he can feasibly come home is sometime next year," she said, "but he has sent you something as an apology for not being able to be with you." Izumi perked up slightly. Hisashi rarely sent things home, but when he did, he sent home a lot of stuff. Mainly hero merch for Izumi, as well as a few things for Inko. Several heroes operated in the Luna colony, mainly as a deterrent. Not much happened up there, but the administrators of the Luna colony would rather not risk an unexpected villain attack up there without heroes around to stop it. So, there were heroes up there, just in case someone started causing trouble. They also had merch sold only on the moon, making getting it difficult. Good thing she had her dad up there. As they walked home, doubt started to form in her mind. Due to working on the moon, Hisashi wasn't privy to Izumi's training to receive One for All, or about All Might's secrets or the truth about where they got Durandal. And since he's not around a lot, she was worried if they could risk informing him of what was going on. They were going to have to talk about it at some point. But that was for another day, far away from now. For now, they could wait. Once home, Izumi set about a personal project to help distract her and work on her analysis skills. Durandal's quirk emulator was impressive but also untested. Paxton never did test the device out after all. So, she might as well do it for him. According to Durandal, the emulator can only copy quirks if someone physically touches his body, and it can store up to 30 quirks, allowing him to use them whenever he likes. There are some limitations, though, quirks that can't be emulated. Mutation-based quirks were a given, as robots can't spontaneously spawn organic wings or gills, not that it needs the latter. Quirks that require a stockpile of something can't be replicated either. Well, they can, but only the base states of the quirk are copied, not the stockpile. Finding that last one out relieved All Might, as One for All is a stockpile quirk. She was glad Paxton's dream of an army of All Mights was impossible. Sadly, that didn't mean there were other, just as powerful quirks out there that could be used as a substitute. Another problem was energy consumption. The quirk emulator is a power-hungry system. Whilst normal operations let him operate without issue, using the quirk emulator overclocks his reactor, indicated by his glowing spine, which leads to overheating. The rate of overheating depends on the quirk in question, but more experimentation in that area is required before she can determine the average duration he can use the emulator. There might also be other limitations, but Durandal only had access to a few quirks, the repair quirk he started with, her mother's, and All Might's. Not exactly much to work with. Good thing that, starting Monday, she'll be allowed to bring him with her. As much as she didn't want him emulating everyone's quirks, there was no doubt that people would pet him whilst there, so they'll probably be added accidentally. Oh well, at least it will allow them to experiment further. Speaking of experimentation, Durandal, last time we talked about your features, you mentioned Armored Wolf mode. What's that? Izumi asked later that day, sitting on her bed with Durandal sitting beside her. Oh, that. Basically, I become a suit of armor for someone, Durandal replied. From what I can tell, Paxton wanted to make a battlefield assistant that can switch between support and armored roles. Whilst in Armored Wolf mode, the wearer gets improved mobility, firepower, situational awareness, and increased punching power. But I can't use the quirk emulator whilst in that mode. So it's a trade-off between a suit of armor that makes you faster and stronger or having access to both a second combatant and quirk user, Izumi said, writing it down in her notebook. Both modes had their advantages and disadvantages. How long does it take to switch to Armored Wolf mode? Don't know, never used it before, Durandal replied. We can test it out if you like, but I recommend you take your skirt off first so that it doesn't get in the way. Izumi nodded before she stood up and took her skirt off. She didn't mind having Durandal around whilst she was changing, as despite sounding like a guy, he was asexual. Besides, she was only removing her skirt. "Okay, I'm ready," Izumi said, standing in the middle of her room with her legs apart and arms out away from her body. "Activate Armored Wolf Mode." "Understood," Durandal said before he moved up behind her and stood up on his hind legs. His arms, legs, chest and head then split open before he moved forwards and started to wrap around Izumi's body, closing up around her chest, arms and legs, forming a suit of armor around her body. The front legs protected her arms and hands, the hind legs protected her legs and feet, whilst his head formed a protective helmet around her head. "Okay, so this feels strange," Izumi said as she examined the suit of armor she found herself wearing. It was tight in places, mainly around the chest and head, but she could easily guess why that was. She had long, fluffy hair, after all. It's surprisingly comfortable in places. But, few things to take note for next time. Hair may need to be tied into a ponytail so it doesn't get in the way, and extra space will need to be made to accommodate my chest. Also, how long did it take to enter this mode? 10 seconds, Durandal replied. "Looks like we won't be able to switch modes in the middle of a fight." "No, we won't," Izumi nodded. "Is there anything we can do in this mode other than protect me?" "Well, there are thrusters in the legs. Not sure what we can do with those. There's also the MIWR, a multi-integrated weapon replicator. While in this mode, we can pick up weapons and replicate them. But it looks like there's only enough storage space for 4 weapons, and we need to provide the ammo. Funny, there are only 3 weapons stored in the system, an anti-armor pistol, a combat whip, and a rocket launcher." What?" Izumi asked, sounding rather shocked. She was interested in the thrusters in the legs, but a rocket launcher. Why the hell does she have that? "Well, I can already tell we're not going to use that one or the anti-armor pistol," Durandal remarked. "The combat whip, on the other hand, might be useful. You can easily keep someone at range with it or restrain them." Izumi nodded before her eyes drifted towards her poster of All Might standing beside Germany's #1 hero, the Storm Hero Blitz. It was made to celebrate the two bringing down Dr. Necro and his army of Nazi zombies. No, I am not making that up. It was also double-sided, with the other side having a more pin-up-style poster of the R18 hero Midnight and the Lust hero Succubus, Germany's second highest-ranked hero, who helped bring down Dr. Necro. Both women were very good at using whips and other means to bring down their foes. She blushed at the thought, remembering their provocative pose on their side of the poster. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's focus on learning how to fight first, before throwing in something complex like a whip. Also, disengage armor mode, she said before the armor spilt and removed itself from around her body, and Durandal returned to his wolf form. Did that take the same amount of time? Durandal nodded. Yep, 10 seconds. I don't think it will be possible to change how quickly I switch between modes, not without some serious hardware and software updates. Which for me won't come cheap as they'll have to be custom made. I am 10 years out of date after all. Izumi nodded before she put her skirt back on. Well, at least we have something else to try and practice with. Shouldn't be too difficult. Whatever we learn from the guy All Might's bringing in to help train me should easily transition to fighting in armor. Durandal nodded. They had agreed to bring him in on the secret surrounding All Might and his quirk, mainly because he'll be with her all the time, especially if they manage to get to UA. And that Izumi may have accidentally blurted it out. Besides, they were keeping his quirk emulator a secret anyway. Izumi, if you are able to attend UA, how do you intend for me to come with you? Durandal asked. Emotional support animals aren't exactly allowed into combat situations. Then I'll register you as a piece of support equipment, Izumi replied as she sat down. It's not unheard of for heroes to wear armor or have a robot following them around and helping them fight, and you can do both. You mainly see heroes in America and Germany with them, but they're not uncommon in other countries, she said before she got out one of her notebooks. Take the hero Ingenium. He wears a powered exoskeleton that helps enhance his engine quirk. An air jet has several drones following him around on top of his armor. Unlike heroes, most villains try to kill the heroes trying to stop them, so it makes sense to wear armor. A bullet is still a bullet, after all, Durandal added. Not every quirk comes with bullet resistance. Izumi nodded. She knew of far too many promising young heroes whose careers ended at the barrel end of a firearm. Paxton's Little War taught the world that heroes weren't as immune to bullets as they once thought, so many heroes were wearing body armor these days. It was shocking how much had changed because of him. Robots had become far more advanced but more regulated, with combat robots being almost impossible to obtain by civilians. Hero costumes started incorporating proper armor into them. Cybernetics had also become more commonplace, and obtaining a license to use your quirk for non-hero work-related jobs had become more accessible and cheaper. Due to people relying less on robots, more people with desired quirks needed to be employed to fill workplace gaps. So, they made it easier for people to get into jobs where their quirks would prove useful. All this change because of one man. Even though I'm getting one for all, I would prefer to have some form of protection, Izumi said as she flipped through her notebook, stopping at the page with her design for her hero costume. Probably should put some armor on it, just in case. I can't be wearing you all the time. Durandal nodded his head. Agreed. Sometimes it's better for me to be in wolf mode than armored wolf mode. Besides, I can't use my quirk emulator whilst you're wearing me. Hopefully, come Monday, I'll be allowed to come to school with you. Keeping you safe isn't easy when I can't follow you into school. Besides, if we want to know the limits of my quirk emulator, we're going to need quirks to test it. I know that, Izumi said with a frown. It's just that I don't know if it's okay to copy other people's quirks. Never mind, I just remembered that one of the boys in one of the other classes could copy other people's quirks, so you copying them for later use should be fine. Hopefully. Glad you agree with me, Durandal said, although emulating his quirk seems redundant since I already do that. Izumi nodded before she laid back in bed. Hopefully, the students and teachers at Nabu Middle School won't mind her having a robot wolf following her around. Maybe they'll just leave her alone like they normally do. Nabu Middle School. Friday. Oh God, how wrong she was. She should have known from when she walked into Nabu Middle School on Monday with Durandal by her side that she would be the center of attention. Because who in their right mind walks into a school with a robot wolf that looks like it was made for the military? It only worsened when their homeroom teacher told them he was her emotional support animal. And could talk. Everyone in her class kept looking at her during lessons, and during lunch, she was bombarded by questions from what felt like the entire school. With more from her class whilst they waited for lessons to start. It was overwhelming. Thankfully, Durandal managed to draw their attention away from her by answering most of the questions since she was not used to this much attention. But it was still exhausting. The next day was the same, with more students approaching her and asking questions about her and Durandal. But it wasn't as bad as the day before. Still exhausting, though. Things started to quiet down a bit come Wednesday and Thursday, and by Friday, the questions had stopped, and things had returned to normal. She was glad that people started treating her like they used to before she brought Durandal along with her, even if she got the occasional glance her way. By now, everyone in the school had a rough idea of what had happened to her and was giving her some space. Unfortunately, this meant that after the hype surrounding Durandal died down, almost no one wanted to talk to her. So, while she sat in their classroom, waiting for their homeroom teacher to arrive, the other students returned to their own social groups, leaving Izumi to sit alone. She had mixed feelings about this. On one hand, she was glad she wasn't being bombarded with questions all the time, but it sometimes felt too much like Aldera. At least they weren't bullying her or calling her quirkless. The teachers here were thankfully a lot more diligent in that area. If there was one good thing that came out of this was that a lot of people wanted to pet Durandal, allowing him to copy their quirks for later testing. While unsure about it, she figured it would be better to find out its limitations as soon as possible. He did say he could delete quirks from his database. After all, there was no point in keeping the data on a quirk if he couldn't emulate it. Now she had a better idea of what quirks he could and couldn't emulate and how long they could be emulated. Quirks that rely on biological processes like digestion or breathing can't be emulated, nor biological components like blood or fat. Enhancement quirks that improve strength and speed can't be emulated either. Quirks that rely on physical contact can be emulated, depending on what the quirk does and how contact is made, as well as quirks that work through the eyes. Strangely, quirks that require you to kiss the target can be emulated, but instead of working through Durandal's lips, which he doesn't have, they work through his tail. Guess Paxton realized this early on and made a workaround. There was also time. The emulator was a power-hungry system, and when active, overheated the reactor quickly. Depending on the quirk in question, he could only keep it active for about 2 to 7 seconds, which seriously limited the effectiveness of some quirks. It was almost annoying how few quirks he could emulate and how little time he could use them. Out of all the quirks he had copied, he could only emulate 15 out of all the quirks in the school. And they were all emitter quirks. Transformation and mutant quirks just couldn't be replicated by a machine. Even then, he deleted almost all of them because he could not keep the active long enough for them to be of any use, leaving him with a quirk that let him make a shield in front of him and a quirk that allows him to teleport small objects but not himself. To be fair, the emulator was a prototype, so this was probably to be expected. As she continued to go through what she had learned, 3 of her classmates surrounded the students sitting in front of her, a tall boy with messy indigo hair and purple eyes with very dark bags underneath them. "Hey Hitoshi," one of the students said, "been brainwashing anyone lately?" The boy, Hitoshi, let out a sigh and shook his head. "No." "Oh, come on," one of the other students said. "Wouldn't it be fun to brainwash everyone in school?" "I told you I can't do that," Hitoshi said calmly. "People I control can't do anything that requires advanced brain function. Plus, I can't just hypnotize people with just a click of my fingers. It only works if someone responds to me. Everyone would know what I was doing. A brainwashing quirk. That was interesting, and powerful too. You could end a fight easily with that. Of course, you'll have to make them respond to you first. You'll need to be very good at getting underneath people's skin to get it to work if they know your power. Plus, it wouldn't work on someone who's mute or deaf, so you won't be able to rely on it all the time. You'd need some kind of backup weapon and training in hand-to-hand combat, but you could become a powerful hero. You okay there, Izumi?" A voice to her left asked, sounding concerned. Izumi froze in her seat, realizing that she had accidentally started muttering. A quick glance to the side revealed that the entire class was staring at her. She looked back down at her desk and hid her embarrassment behind one of her notebooks. Thankfully, their homeroom teacher walked in, drawing everyone's attention away from her. With a sigh of relief, she put her notebook away and got ready for today's lesson, hoping that no one would pay her mumbling any thought. Again, oh, how wrong she was. Later that day, when she was leaving the mess hall, someone called to her, "Hey Izumi." She yelped as she turned around quickly at the unexpected call to find Hitoshi leaning against a wall, looking at her with a blank look. Izumi looked at him with a nervous look on her face whilst Durandal took on a combat stance. Hi. Hitoshi. Is this about my mumbling from earlier? If so, then I'm sorry about it, she said as she bowed in apology. Hitoshi smirked. You don't need to apologize, Izumi. I'm here to thank you. You are the first person here who said I could become a hero with my quirk. Most people here say that my quirk is more suited for a villain. Izumi righted herself and looked at him with a confused look whilst Durandal took a calm stance, no longer registering him as a threat. They called your quirk villainous. Why would they do that? You have an amazing quirk. You could easily beat most villains with it just by getting them to talk to you. Hitoshi looked at her with an almost surprised look on his face. You don't think my quirk is villainous? Izumi nodded her head. No quirk is villainous. Any quirk can be used for good, and sadly evil. It's the people who choose to use their quirks for evil who are villainous. Yours can be so useful for hero work. Hitoshi continued to look at her with a confused look before he smirked. Well, at least I'm not the only one who thinks so. You want to become a hero? Izumi asked, sounding surprised. Hitoshi nodded. I do. I plan to apply to UA, there I will become a pro hero. Well, I don't want to sound rude, but I think you might need to bulk up a bit, Durandal remarked. You don't exactly have the right build for it at the moment. I hate to admit it, but he's kind of right, Izumi said nervously. Hero work requires a lot of physical activity. You can't always rely on your quirk to win the day. Sometimes you have to, for lack of a better word, punch a guy in the face. And I'm saying sorry in advance, but you don't look like you have the strength to make it as a hero. Plus, to get on the hero course, you've got to pass both the written and practical exams, the latter of which, whilst getting some flack recently due to prioritizing more combat-oriented quirks, has you fight robots. It won't be easy for you to pass without combat training, she explained, knowing full well that his quirk would be useless against robots. I'm planning on applying to UA as well, and I'm training almost every day to help to get stronger. Hitoshi looked at her for a few moments with a blank stare before raising his arm and checking it out, noting the lack of muscles. I'm going to need to get stronger, aren't I? He asked, getting a nod from Izumi. Thanks for the advice. I might have a chance at getting onto the hero course now. Izumi froze on the spot, mouth open in surprise. Someone was thanking her for her advice. No one had ever thanked her before. They mostly told her to shut up or, in Bakugo's case, blasted her in the face. This was the first time anyone had thanked her. With tears in her eyes, she rushed to Hitoshi and hugged him. Thank you. You're the first person ever to thank me. Hitoshi was taken quite aback by Izumi's sudden hug and the amount of water coming out of her eyes. But, from the rumors he had been hearing surrounding her, the bullying she was subjected to at her old school, he could understand why she was so happy to receive positive feedback from someone. This was probably the first time someone thanked her for something. Just how bad was it for her at her previous school? You're welcome, Hitoshi said, trying to calm her down and stop her from soaking his uniform. Noting it would probably not work, he decided to distract her. So, any more advice you could give me? Like equipment I could use? Izumi's ears did not fail her, as she immediately jumped back, tears still coming from her eyes, just at a significantly reduced rate, notebook in hand. Oh, well, I might have something in mind, Izumi said, getting out one of her notebooks. One small question, does your quirk work over something like a megaphone? Hitoshi shook his head. No, it doesn't work if it's converted into an electronic signal. Oh, Izumi sighed. Well, there goes the voice filter idea. It would have been so cool if you could change your voice to sound like the enemy. That would make them distrust their communications, she said, sounding disappointed before she suddenly felt a hand resting on her shoulder. Well, it's nice to see you making friends, Izumi, a calm and kind voice said beside her. Izumi looked to the side to see a boy with short blonde hair and blue eyes standing beside her, a friendly smile on his face. Nido Manoma, Hitoshi said calmly. What are you doing here? Oh hey, it's the guy who can copy quirks, Durandal remarked. Well, your robot companion seems to be well informed, Nido remarked as he crouched down and patted Durandal on the head. I'm going to guess that you're a custom job, right? You can say that, Durandal replied. Which was technically the truth. Whilst I am programmed to protect Izumi and comfort her when needed, I can, if ordered, to rip someone's face off. Okay, just trying to make friends, Nido said as he raised his hands in mock surrender. Durandal, please don't threaten the other students. I don't want to get into trouble, Izumi said, not wanting to cause an incident, before turning towards Nido. Sorry about him. He can be a bit overprotective at times with good reasons, too. That's fine. Probably registered me as hostile, Nido said calmly. So, I couldn't help but overhear that you two want to attend UA. Well, looks like we all have something in common. You want to go to UA as well? Izumi said, sounding surprised, getting a nod from Nido. Well, I suppose it'll be easier for you, Hitoshi remarked. Your quirk lets you copy anyone else's quirk. Indeed it does. But only for 5 minutes, Nito said, holding up 5 fingers on one hand before switching them to 3. And I can only copy 3 quirks at a time. And there lies my problem. You need other people's quirks to copy to help you fight, Izumi said. Nito nodded. It's the one reason why people tell me that I can't become a hero, that I can't do anything without the help of others. Not that it's going to stop me from proving them wrong, he said with a smile, and here I am, talking to 2 likewise individuals who also want to become heroes, but have been told time and time again that they can't. One because people say his quirk is villainous, the other because she is quirkless. Now, I don't know about you two, but I, for one, think we should team up. That's actually a good idea, Izumi said, getting confused looks from Hitoshi. Heroes team up all the time to form hero teams to either help protect a wider area, deal with a much larger variety of threats or tasks, or because their powers complement each other. Like the Wild Pussycats or the 4 Holy Swords. Well, technically, there are 5 members of the 4 Holy Swords, but they've been called that for so long that changing the name might make people confused, plus only 4 of them use swords, she said before she stopped herself from going on another mumble storm. Anyway, what I'm saying is that heroes team up to help each other not only with dealing with villains, but also to help each other improve. And if we team up, help each other prepare, collectivity, our chances of getting into UA's hero course increase, Hitoshi said before he smiled slightly. We might just be able to get in. Nito smiled. Glad you two agree. It's not going to be easy. We may have to resort to unheroic behavior and tactics at times, especially for you, Izumi. You don't have a quirk. Don't worry about me. Not every hero has a combat-oriented quirk. I can do this, Izumi said, sounding determined. Plus, I also have Durandal with me. Durandal nodded. I may have a few optional extras that can be added on at a later date that can help out with hero work. I was programmed to protect Izumi after all. Oh, so you can be converted into a combat model, Nito said. Well, it's always good to have a companion, even if it's a robot. You can't go wrong with a little backup. Or armor, can't forget adequate protection, Izumi said. Oh yes, I'd recommend you bulk up a bit as well. Like I said to Hitoshi, you can't always rely on your quirk in a fight. Sometimes your target will wear armor, and you won't be able to use your quirk on them. Oh, by the way, what's the activation requirement for your quirk? She asked, holding up a notebook. All I need to do is touch the target, and I can copy their quirk, Nito replied. I don't have to touch much of them to copy their quirk. Only as much as a few strands of hair is enough. I see, Izumi said, writing that down in her notebook. Do the strands of hair have to be attached to the target's head, or does it still work if the hairs are not attached? Nito opened his mouth as if to speak but stopped for a few moments before closing it, looking to be deep in thought. I don't know. I never tried that. That's something new to test out, thanks. You're welcome, Izumi said nervously, feeling happy that 2 people had thanked her for her advice today. Hitoshi smirked. In all the time here, I've never made a single friend. And yet, during my last year here, I made 2 in one day. Never thought I'll make some friends here. Well, it helps that we all share the same goal and have similar problems holding us back, Nito said, right Izumi? He asked as he turned towards her, only to see her looking at them with tears in her eyes. Before either of them could ask what was wrong, Izumi leapt forwards and brought both of them into a hug, tears gushing out of her eyes. Thank you. I've never had friends before. The 2 boys could only look at her with confused and shocked looks on their faces. They had both heard the rumors about her. No one transfers to a new school this early into the year and in such an emotionally damaged state without some people coming up with reasons why she may be in that state. And seeing she had no friends before, just how bad had her life been before coming here? Nito was also wondering if she was quirkless, as there was no way someone could produce this many tears without a quirk. It was then that the bell signaling lessons were about to started to ring. You are, Izumi, I think lessons are about to start. So would you kindly let so go so we're not late for class? Hitoshi asked nervously. Izumi nodded before she took a step back. Sorry about that, it's just, I've never had any proper friends before, she said nervously, tears still falling from her eyes. Thank you. Nito smiled, happy to be of help. Now, let's get going to class, before we're late. Izumi nodded before the four of them rushed off back to class. When Izumi went home that day, she told her mother that she had made 2 friends at school today, 2 proper friends who didn't bully her. Inko was over the moon, happy that her daughter had found a proper friend. One who wouldn't bully her and call her useless. Meanwhile, when Hitoshi arrived home, he looked up a few heroes. Izumi had given him a list of heroes whose quirks weren't combat-oriented to help give him a few ideas on how he should fight. A few seemed interesting, but one caught his eye, an underground hero who looked more like a hobo with some kind of tape-like weapon around his neck. He wouldn't have caught his attention if it wasn't for the description of his quirk, the ability to cancel out the quirk of anyone he looks at. He smirked slightly as he researched the erasure hero, Eraserhead, and his weapon of choice, Binding Cloth. Meanwhile, somewhere in UA. So, you believe Durandal might be a threat, a small white-furred mammal of indeterminate species wearing a suit said with a smile. A cup of tea in hand and looking at all the notes Izumi had made about the robot. All Might nodded, sitting down in a chair in his deflated form opposite the white-furred mammal, who was sitting at a large desk. I do. Even though he says he's loyal to Izumi and will protect her, he's still one of Dr. Paxton's machines. We both know how deadly those machines can be, and I'm worried it might turn on her at any moment. It doesn't help that he knows the secrets of One for All. I see. You're worried that your successor may be in trouble, the white-furred mammal said, getting a nod from All Might. Only a few people in the world knew the secrets behind his quirk and the injury that caused him to limit the amount of time he had in his hero form. The mammal before him was one of them, UA's principal, Nizu, who had his own reasons for despising Paxton. Even though he said he rebelled against his creator and escaped. I can't help but worry that he left a few traps inside of him or a secret loyalty program, All Might said with a frown. I won't feel safe unless we check his code. But, that would bring up all kinds of problems. Like the fact he has a positronic brain, Nizu said, taking a sip of tea. If he were a normal robot, then it wouldn't be difficult to go over his source code with a fine-tooth comb, but the fact he has a positronic brain makes things complicated. Thanks to the numerous laws surrounding AI and positronic brains, very few companies can make them. As such, if we want to check his source code for any malicious programs, we will need permission from both the robot's owner, and the manufacturer. Not to mention that we will need several people present whilst we check him, including representatives from the manufacturer and another robot with a positronic brain to confirm that no tampering is done, among several others. All Might nodded. Ever since Paxton's Little War, robots and AI have become far more advanced, but also more regulated. Especially for fully sentient AIs with positronic brains. Only 8 companies in the world are allowed to make positronic brains, and only one is allowed to sell them as robotic pets with limitations. Paxton made people fear his machines and in turn, robots in general. We would have to reveal that he's one of Paxton's machines, All Might said with a frown. There was no way they could pretend he was made by one of the few companies that are allowed to make them, as none of them will have the information needed with them. And we will have to reveal what he's capable of too, which includes the Quirk emulator. Nizu nodded, which will no doubt end up in the robot being taken away to be dismantled and its Quirk emulator experimented on. Research and development agencies across the globe will want to get their hands on that device, and I do not doubt that many powerful villains would like to acquire it as well. This device is far too dangerous, and no one should have their hands on it, even if they intend to use it for good. It needs to be kept secret. Doing that means we can't check him for malicious code, All Might said, getting a nod from Nizu. There wasn't much they could do, as anything they could do to check Durandal would require them to reveal who made him and what he could do, and that would cause far too many problems and put unnecessary stress on Izumi, stress that she could not afford to be dealing with right now. They couldn't even do an off-the-books inspection, as if that ever came out, then it would look bad on everyone involved. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do but keep an eye on him, Nizu said. As long as he doesn't use the emulator in public or in a way that won't make people suspicious, everything should be fine. Registering him as support equipment shouldn't be difficult either. What if someone asks about his positronic brain? All Might asked. Simple, we say that Eris Enterprises made it, Nizu said with a smile. Their CEO still owes me a few favors. Unfortunately, those favors won't be enough to perform a check on Durandal's source code, but it'll be enough to get him in with her without people asking too many questions. All Might let out a sigh of relief. He may not fully trust the robot, but at least Durandal will be able to accompany Izumi if she manages to get into UA. Thank you, Nizu. At least we can ensure she won't have any issues bringing him along. And, apologies if I brought up any bad memories about Paxton and what he did to you. Nizu let out a chuckle. Oh, don't worry about that. Whenever I remember what that man and his minions did to me, I remind myself that I knocked his eyes out, informed the US of the location of his ship, and had a front row seat to them, reducing his ship's scrap metal, he said with a smile. Just a shame I couldn't get a recording of the screams he made. Oh well, I still have the footage of the US Navy pummeling his ship. All Might nodded, making a mental note to never get on Nizu's bad side. I must admit, you've chosen quite the smart candidate for your successor, Nizu added, looking through some of the notes Izumi had made. I am quite impressed by her analytical skills. The sheer amount of detail she puts into her notes is astonishing. There are some rough edges here and there, and it can do with some improvements. But with the proper training, her skill can be nurtured and become something great. I almost say she would have made a great successor to me. A shame you found her first, but I couldn't think of a better candidate to take one for all. But, Nizu said with a slight frown, I do believe that there's one person out there who disagrees with your choice. All Might nodded. My old sidekick, Sir Night-Eye. I've asked him to help train her, to teach her how to fight and improve her analytical skill, but he's only agreed to meet with her now. I don't think he approves of my choice and may have his own candidate in mind. Well, I suggest that you talk to him about this first, before he meets with her and bluntly tells her to give up on the idea of getting one for all, Nizu said. She's been damaged enough already by people telling her to abandon her dream. One more person telling her that, at such a delicate point in her life, might be too much for her, even with the help she's getting. All Might nodded. Don't worry, I intend to have a word with him beforehand. He had no intention of letting Izumi meet Sir Night-Eye before he talked with his former sidekick. Right now, Izumi's mental state was like an unstable Jenga tower with very few bricks left that could be removed safely. One wrong nudge and the entire thing would come crashing down, and he was worried that Sir Night-Eye would just push the tower over. He needed to make sure that he didn't do that, as the poor girl had suffered enough already. If Sir Night-Eye refused to teach her, that was fine. But if he tried to make her give up one for all, he would be in for a world of pain. That will be it for this part. I hope everyone enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like and comment if you want part 3. If you want to hear more from me, subscribe. I hope to see you all in the next one.